Hey, what's up, everybody? Video 44 coming at you with another video. All right, so I figured I'd comment on the Julius Randle situation. Julius Randle and Rudy Gobert had a circumstance where Rudy occupied the paint with 5 minutes to go in their previous game, looking for an interior pass, and Julius denied him that pass, and he ended up getting a 3-second violation because he walked out of the paint casually after the pass was denied to him. And look, man, I saw Kenny Meacham's content, and he was essentially showing us a million different instances where Karl Towns would give him that pass, would get him the ball, and it makes sense to do so because he's occupying the paint. He's pretty much hijacking a 3-second violation if you don't give him the ball. But, you know, Julius Randle is a different kind of guy, so it's like, nah, you're not going to force me into giving you the ball in that situation. I would much rather work whatever I want to work out around the perimeter and play make the way I see fit. So, you know, it's just newness is part of the problem there. You got players that never play with one another having to work out how to work with one another, and you got Rudy Gobert occupying the paint when Julius Randle is clearly trying to create something else going down there. He didn't want to be forced into simply being a passer to Rudy Gobert for a turnaround hook. So that is something that ultimately looked worse than probably needed to look. Now, Julius probably should have given him the pass. But, you know, Rudy has to understand that, you know, you got to get your butt out of the paint. If he don't give you that pass, you got to get out of the paint, bro. Like, you don't make your whole team suffer a 3-second violation, which you basically did on purpose, down the stretch of a tie basketball game because you didn't receive a pass. You deal with that later on when y'all talk about it in the locker room after the win. Then you talk about, hey, man, why don't you give me the ball? Or get out of the paint and repost if that's what you want to do, but don't allow yourself to get a 3-second violation in that situation. Hurt his whole team, man, trying to make a point that was really minute in the sense that sometimes you're just not going to get that pass. So I don't know, man. I think that they were both somewhat wrong. I agree with a lot of people who were saying that. They were both somewhat wrong because at the end of the day, Julius Randle does need to make that pass so that the 3-second violation isn't possible. And Rudy is going to score underneath the basket. Like, he's not going to not score. You get an assist off that. So, you know, Julius is a guy we watched here in LA. We know Julius pretty well as a basketball player. His development was pretty frustrating because his first year he went down with a broken leg. We had to sit that out. And then when we did get him down there, he was the kind of player who tended to pick up charging fouls at least twice a game for like a whole 2 years of development. This is basically what we dealt with. Really good player, has better passing ability than what this would describe. It's definitely a triple-double threat in a lot of cases, but since going to New York, he turned himself into a star. He hit the last game-winning shot in the last one for the Timberwolves, so he's feeling himself. He's not particularly happy to be in Minnesota. He's going after a contract, and I don't think this is the best way for him to get it. Having issues with your new teammate is not a good way to make people think that you're worth the money that you ultimately want. And Rudy's already paid, you know what I mean? Rudy's not fishing for a contract, so regardless of what, they owe Rudy all types of money, and they mortgage so much of the future for Rudy to where he's going to be prioritized just off of the strength of the trade. So Julius is probably not happy to be in Minnesota in the grand scheme of things. I don't necessarily, I've never been to Minnesota, but I wouldn't exactly want to play there either right now, you know what I mean? They are a good team, but not without Karl Towns. You know, they changed the whole identity and asking Julius to make up for it with what he brings to the table, which ain't the same thing. So, you know, I don't know, man. Anthony Edwards got in in Rudy's face, essentially saying, what the hell was that? Why didn't you get out of the paint? You know, it's a tied basketball game with 5 minutes to go. Like, you can't afford to have turnovers that are deliberate in pouting type situations. But Rudy Gobert, man, I tell you the truth, Rudy Gobert lost me a long time ago when he did that whole COVID thing with Donovan Mitchell rubbing everything that had COVID on it, and eventually Donovan ended up getting COVID too. And, you know, that whole situation just kind of showed me that he's not always going to be as mature as maybe you would expect someone to be. And this was just another example of that, in my opinion. It's a lack of maturity, man. And It is what it is. I think a lot of basketball minds have made a great case for why he should be Defensive Player of the Year 3 or 4 times over. Maybe the rest of us don't necessarily see what they see, but I'll listen. So I'm not going to sit up here and try to discredit the man, although I do feel like my guy Anthony Davis has been slighted quite a few times for that award. So there is a special interest for me in seeing Anthony get it. But, I'm not here to make the case on whether or not he deserves that award at this point. I think at the end of the day, Rudy Gobert hurt his team in that particular situation, so did Julius Randle. Julius needs to be the bigger man in that situation because ultimately it's in your control to get the basketball to him or not. And you chose not to for your own set of reasons. Maybe they were good ones. But that's what ultimately transpired because of it. And so the majority of the blame, in my opinion, goes to Julius Randle. You're on a brand new team. One of the mainstay players in the paint, occupying the paint. He has a smaller person on him, and he's asking for an interior pass. You feed the big the ball. Like, that's what I was raised on Shaquille O'Neal. You feed the big man. You feed him. Humor him. Even if you don't trust his interior scoring skills, you still get him the ball. You know what I mean? And so, I don't know. I think Julius showed a certain level of selfishness that was met by a certain level of immaturity. And if I'm the Minnesota Timberwolves, I'm not in love with either one of them on my team personally. I'm really not. They have a love for those type of players, those two players that I simply don't have as a basketball fan. And if I were controlling the Minnesota Timberwolves, I would not have probably made a trade for Julius Randle. I wouldn't say that they made a bad trade. I think the process of getting back multiple pieces for Karl Towns was a good decision for the flexibility of their future. And I thought making a decision to do that is never a bad idea in their situation. However, I probably would have tried to find another landing spot for the pieces that they got. Maybe that wasn't possible. Maybe that's still a plan. But I'm not keeping Julius Randle on the Minnesota Timberwolves. I'm not paying him what he wants, put it like that. At the end of this year, I'm not going to let him walk. So I think their plan is probably to pay Julius. I'm just telling you what I wouldn't do. I'm not in the business of signing up for a $200 million contract for Julius Randle or whatever. I'm not doing that. But, I don't think they're going to retrade him at the deadline. So unless they're planning on letting him walk, that's probably what's going to happen there. Now, letting him walk is just contract coming off the books. So it's not the worst thing in the world for a team that needs flexibility to create that flexibility by allowing a player that you traded for to expire, and get that money in the free agency later on. Obviously, they have a piece in place that they should value very much at that power forward spot in Naz Reid, and a young player off the bench by the name of Terrence Shannon, who should also look for those minutes as well. So, in the grand scheme of things, losing Julius Randle probably ain't the worst thing in the world for their books, but they probably should get some type of equity in response to his departure. So, I don't know. It just depends on how they're viewing things, what their plan is ultimately in Minnesota. I don't honestly know what it is, but if I'm them, there are options, and I don't think it would hurt to shop those people. Both of them. Rudy for sure, because his value's diminishing by the second. He's still somebody that people want to give Defensive Player of the Year to, so it's probably best to move on from him while he still has that value. That's what I would do. And Julius Randle, because like I said, I ain't paying him. So, yeah, I'm moving them both, man. if it's possible. So, I don't know, man. At the end of the day, Anthony Edwards deserves better, man. He deserves better running mates, bro. I like the interior presence of shot blocking. I like an attacking player like Julius Randle. Those are valuable pieces in the grand scheme of things. They're not just negative assets, but that's not the type of vision I have for an Anthony Edwards-led basketball team. There needs to be some athleticism down there, some youth down there. And while Julius does provide some athleticism, not the athleticism that I have in mind, because Julius thinks in a lot of cases that he's the star. So you're going to have circumstances like this taking place where he's just not going to want to do whatever it is that ultimately the team's going to want him to do. And that just comes from watching him play for 4 years here in LA. So I don't know, man. I just think that Julius has not always been the most mature player himself, man. And he's always believed in himself more so than maybe the rest of the people did. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. So while he thinks of himself like LeBron James, people see him as Julius Randle, and it just never translated to him being a great team player most of the time. So for me, it's like I can't have that in the locker room with Anthony Edwards. And I think Anthony's handling it very well thus far. Very unselfish superstars. He's comfortable in his own skin, not pretending to be something bigger than he is. But at the same time, people need to be deferring to him. And two role players, with all due respect to those starters, two role players on his basketball team don't need to be bickering back and forth, eating up half the damn cap between the two of them about who's going to get the ball. Y'all both need to make sacrifices so that he can get the damn ball, and that's the reality of it. And if they don't have a strong enough presence in place to demand that, then they're not going to get as far as they need to go. I think with Karl Anthony Towns, they didn't necessarily have that problem. Karl Anthony Towns was a superstar who didn't believe himself necessarily to be a superstar, so would always defer to somebody like Jimmy Butler or Anthony Edwards. He was always going to allow that to happen and still put up a ceiling of 70 points in a game. You know what I mean? So in the grand scheme of things, to create flexibility, you needed to move somebody, and Karl was probably the better bet to get you a return that you would want. But Karl's probably not the one I'm moving, man. I'm moving Rudy. I'm moving Rudy for the flexibility I need. So that's just how I would do it, especially in a collective bargaining agreement that doesn't allow for much movement to begin with. You don't have flexibility to just say, okay, I need to get this piece off, let me move it. No, that's not the era you're in, so you have to kind of do what you were allowed to do. The problem is, now you've messed up your team. now you stuck with stuff that really doesn't want to play with one another. They're eating up, like I said, half of your cap between the two of them. And you got young players behind you who are ready to step up and probably take those roles respectively. You know, they got a guy by the name of Josh Minott, who's on this team, who's ready to step up. He showed me in the preseason he's a good player. But, like, they got him playing behind a bunch of people who he's probably just as good at in the grand scheme of things when it's all said and done. And I just know better, man. This is one of those situations where you just trade stuff, addition by subtraction, and just go forward with the youth movement. You know what I mean? To become pick rich, once again, I say the Minnesota Timberwolves, just like the Pacers, in my opinion, have reached their ceiling. Just like the Pacers. You got to the Western Conference Finals, wonderful. You ain't getting no further than that. Move all this stuff that has value around Anthony and create the future that you deserve around Anthony Edwards, Josh Minott, a bunch of pick equity, Rob Dillingham, Shannon. You know, they got talent, young talent. They don't need to go forward with the guys who are kind of in their prime, who don't necessarily fit with one another, who want money, who want to be paid from here on out. That's not the future. That ain't the future. So we'll see what Minnesota wants to do. They're in a blessed space of flexibility. From what I understand, they also have a problem with the other player they picked up from the Knicks. Oh, what's that guy's name, man? I can't think of his name. But he don't want to be there either. From what I understand, there's been reports that he doesn't want to play behind who he's forced to play behind. He wants a starting role. And, you know, I think he could do good with a starting role, but he can't demand that. You know, that's a problem. I think at this point, with the league as it is, we need, and I say we with the perspective of the NBA, we need players who know they can start but are willing not to start because there's only but so many starting positions. You know what I mean? He needs to be one of those people. You can't just say, well, I'm a guy and I want to start. Like, and what the hell that got to do with anything? You know? And so that's the problem they're running into. It's a guy who doesn't want to be in Minnesota. He'll probably sit on the bench for a different team, but maybe not the Timberwolves, that kind of thing. So you just got to move them, man. You got to move those players. You got them for flexibility. Now move them. That's really what it comes down to. So, yeah, that's what it is, man. They got problems in Minnesota. And I personally think they have too many young players for them to be sitting on those issues. They really do. Too many good, talented players. So, yeah, that's my take on the Julius Randle situation, man. I think both he and Rudy Gobert are in the wrong. I think both he and Rudy Gobert need to be moved. And that's pretty much what I got to say. BDF 44. I thank you all for watching.